Now, 3 commitments in one day was quite the precedent set for Penn State. That's going to be hard to match, but don't be shocked if Penn State has similar success coming out of this slate of official visits.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm your host of the show, and I am joined once again by Rivals recruiting analyst for Penn State Rivals, and that is Dylan Callaghan-Croley. Dylan, it's great to have you back. Official visits, of course, we talked about it, previewed it the first time. Now, those official visits have turned into 3 commitments, not 1, not 2, but 3 all in one day. And then the hope is June 9th could turn something into that, but that's a hard precedent to follow, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, Penn State has set themselves up really well for Penn State did themselves really well the June 2nd weekend and set themselves a really high bar coming into the second weekend of the month. But this visitors list is one hell of a visitors list. That's where they may stumble into, trying to follow it up, is that I just don't know how many of these guys are ready maybe to commit if all goes well this week. And I think they're going to have to wait on some of these guys, even if everything goes well. But, yeah, definitely set themselves a high bar coming out of last weekend. But definitely should be a fun weekend in Happy Valley this weekend.
Yeah, so we're talking that. We're also going to see whose commitments are on the horizon. And what's interesting about this June 9th group is that a lot of them are already committed. So Penn State's already done a good amount of the work. Of course, today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege. And when you enter promo code LockedOnCollege, easy enough, they're going to throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. That is birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege. And, of course, Locked On Nittany Lions is your go-to podcast for Penn State Rivals. Visit happyvalleyinsider.com for all of the latest Penn State football recruiting, Penn State football news in general. Of course, James Franklin just got done with the presser, media availability, official visits are underway, of course, and then the Big Ten dropping the big schedule release. Dylan, you and I have a lot to cover in such a short amount of time, but let's see how we can jam-pack it all together. But this is the official visits preview episode for June 9th. So let's start there, get to those commitments, and then just try to unpack what we can from that Big Ten, big schedule release here with USC and UCLA in the fold. But June 9th is interesting because all of these players are already committed. I think if you look at the list officially, there's about, 6 players that actually aren't officially committed anywhere. Penn State, of course, is on their radar, or else they wouldn't be visiting. But this seems, I've already framed it this way, I think, with yourself, with Richie, that this feels like it's a coordinated effort to get some of the guys that are higher up their recruiting board at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we mentioned last week, is that Penn State this weekend, is getting most of their commitments on campus. And I'm sure in the upcoming weeks they'll have some commitments who are local come back again on unofficial visits to help with recruiting. But this week, you look at who they have in terms of uncommitted prospects on campus: Nick Marsh, Caleb Odom, Nigel Smith, Mylachi Williams, Jamonta Waller, Vaboue Toure. Those are some of their biggest targets of the cycle. And have your commits on campus this weekend. It allows for strong peer recruiting to happen. The leaders of this class, Quinton Martin, Corey Smith, Donovan Harbor. I mean, Donovan Harbor, for those who follow him on Twitter, is always retweeting anything Penn State recruiting related. Yeah. He is one of Penn State's biggest peer recruiters.
This show. He's talked about this show.
Yeah, exactly. Kenny Wosley, Anthony Specca. No. I mean, they just have so many strong peer recruiters in this class, and to get them all on campus this weekend and really get them in front of these uncommitted guys is going to be quite big for Penn State. Because, I mean, if you look at it, kind of how, in school you talk teacher to student ratio. For Penn State here, you can look at commitment to uncommitted ratio, and it almost has to be 2-1, 3-1 for how this is lining up for him. So, I mean, for Penn State, you got to like the chances or like the opportunity to have, 2 or 3 of your commitments talking to a guy throughout the weekend, plus the coaching staff. It's shaping up to be a strong official visit weekend for Penn State. They always hit these official visits out of the park. There's no question that that's going to happen again. It's just about will of a result and commitment at this point.
Yeah, that's the most important part of this, is that all these guys who are verbally committed to Penn State at this point in time, they are the biggest recruiters for other recruits. James Franklin has said that. I'm sure other Penn State members of the staff have said that. They've acknowledged that when it comes to recruiting, there is no better recruiter than a potential teammate.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Peer recruiting is, I would say, one of the top 3 most important things when it comes to, recruiting college football. Coaching staff recruit, what the coaching staff can do on the recruiting trail is obviously the most important. What you do on the field is pretty important too, but the on the field aspect of things really doesn't impact recruiting to the level that people think it does. Sure, if you are struggling year in and year out, that's going to have an effect. But if Penn State would randomly have a poor season like they have had, 2020, 2021, it's not going to overly affect them. Now, if that would go on for 4 or 5 years, sure. Yeah. But peer recruiting, like you said, having the chance to be recruited by your future teammates, how those relationships are built, how you see yourself fitting into the atmosphere of these programs, whether it's your teammates, coaching staff, both, is really important. And plus, we haven't really talked about it, is these kids are, they have a host on each official visit. Yeah. And that's, also really important because it's somebody who is in the program right now, has an idea of the ins and outs of the program, what it's like. And that's also pretty massive in these recruitments as well. Often when these official visits go really well, you hear about the players talking about how they loved their host throughout the visit, that experience the host gave them.
Now, I know you already listed off some of the guys all of the guys that are uncommitted. Penn State's got some stiff competition when it comes to who they're recruiting against, right? Let's take a Caleb Odom, for example, who's a top tight end in this group. Now, I know they already have Luke Reynolds, but we've seen time and time again that Penn State likes to take 2 types of tight ends. They like to get that more of that diverse skill set of Theo Johnson to Tyler Warren, right? You have Tyler Warren, who's more of the blocking tight end, who can go out and catch a pass, but he's your anchor on that one side of the offensive line. And then Theo Johnson's somebody that can stretch the field. You have Luke Reynolds, who fits more of that Tyler Warren role, and then Caleb Odom here. But with Odom, he's, being recruited by Alabama, Ole Miss, the SEC, Penn State, getting into the fold here. Let's take Jamonta Waller as well. He's from the state of Mississippi. I think this is something that was pointed out by another guest on this show. But the fact that Penn State's even able to get the attention from the top recruit in the state of Mississippi is pretty impressive by James Franklin and staff. So there's a lot of prospects here. Nick Marsh is someone that you mentioned. This is probably their top receiver when it comes to who they're trying to get. Of course, I know Jeremiah Smith's out there, and he's still taking his visits. He's going through his due diligence. But Nick Marsh is probably their most coordinated recruiting effort in terms of wide receiver, because they believe that they have a realistic chance, decommitted from Michigan State. And it seems like all the arrows are pointing that he's going to come to Penn State. So who is the biggest priority out of this small group of uncommitted players that Penn State is going to try to land that verbal commit from, Dylan?
Yeah, that's a great question. Looking at this list, I mean, obviously, Nicholas Marsh is one of those guys. Yep. If Marsh lands with Penn State, I think you have an argument that he's the best wide receiver that James Franklin has ever recruited. I know Justin Shorter was considered a 5-star by people in the industry, and Shorter was a really good prospect coming out of high school. But I think Marsh is maybe a little bit more of a complete prospect coming out of high school. Plays in a little bit better of an offense that gives you an idea of what he's going to be at the next level. Shorter, I believe, came from a option-based offense in high school, which kind of hindered his development early on. And
Right.
he finally did catch on at the college level the last few years at Florida, but it definitely took him a little longer, while Marsh is somebody I think could maybe have a faster impact. Beyond that, I think Jamonta Waller is the biggest recruit on campus this weekend. He has that chance to be that really, dominating game changer.
Number 11. Yep.
Yeah. Micah Parsons is somebody that has been amongst his favorite players for a while, I've been told. And that's what Penn State's selling him on. Penn State's selling him on coming to Penn State, playing off the ball, being that edge rusher, that guy who can do a little bit of everything and be a star on the defense. While maybe not Micah Parsons, but maybe Abdul Carter. I mean, Penn State has two perfect examples right there. And that's the goal they have for Waller, and that's really standing out to Waller right now. And I think they do have a really good chance of landing him. Of course, anytime you have a kid coming out of the South, it's always going to be, a full recruitment until he signs on the dotted line. And if he would commit to Penn State, I would expect them to have to recruit him until the very end. But this is a recruitment that Penn State has set themselves up very well coming to this weekend. I don't expect a commitment if all goes well coming out of this weekend, but it is something that I think is very much a realistic opportunity for Penn State here in the next few weeks with Waller, is potentially picking up a commitment at some point. Because if they're not in the lead for him, I think they're top 2, top 3. And like I said, they always hit these official visits out of the park. There's no doubt they're going to do that this weekend. It's just, while you may hit them out of the park, they don't always end the way you want them to. That's the only thing with question with Waller at this point is he going to be a Nittany Lion or not? And I know that's kind of, an obvious type question, but I think Penn State's only going to help themselves this weekend.
Dylan, let's keep this conversation going in just a second. But first, let's hear from our sponsor of today's episode, and that is Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs pants and shorts are great for 3 reasons. First, it's the fit. You will look better and you will definitely feel better wearing Bird Dogs. The second reason is comfort. Goes right along with it. Their stretchy fabric will make your legs look great, and they're comfier than all of your other pants and shorts. And then the final reason is versatility. They give you the freedom to wear one pair of shorts, one pair of pants on the golf course, to a meeting, on a date, hanging out with friends, you name it. I've never had a pair of Bird Dogs myself, so I thought I'd go get a pair of their shorts, and I've got to say, they live up to the billing. I can attest to that. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege and enter promo code LockedOnCollege with your order, and you'll get a free Yeti-style Bird Dogs tumbler with that order. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off, we promise you. And again, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. Happy Valley Insider is your destination for all the latest when it comes to Penn State recruiting and so much more. That's why we brought Dylan on over here to talk about just that. Now, you've mentioned where they kind of stand with guys like, of course, Jamonta Waller, Nick Marsh. Who else is close to committing, Dylan? Is there somebody that is going to be committing maybe in the next 48 hours, 72? Depending on when you listen to this episode, it might be a little different time frame. But I guess at this point, Thursday, June 8th, right?
Yep.
Do we see anybody inside of that window, or is it not going to be until the end of June, maybe even July, where Penn State is either going to land a commitment or know about one that they were targeting?
Sure. Will they land any of the guys I'm about to say before, let's say, next Monday or Tuesday? I'm not 100% sure, but guys that I would put on commitment watch per se coming in this weekend would be defensive end Mylachi Williams, safety Vaboue Toure, and I think those are the top 2. You could maybe throw cornerback Jameer Grimsley into that mix, but with an Alabama official visit set for next weekend, I really don't see that happening.
Okay.
But, Penn State's going to have John Mitchell and Antoine Belgrave Shorter, 2 Florida natives on campus with Grimsley at the same time. So that is something that does stand out. But I would definitely say the two I'm watching are Mylachi Williams and Vaboue Toure in terms of commitments potentially this weekend.
And Toure is another safety. I know they just got DeJuan Lane. Lane's path is a little bit, Lane's lane, if you will, is a little bit different because he could still play safety at the next level, but it sounds like he's going to project at linebacker as I guess that Curtis Jacobs 2.0, right? That guy in the waiting because he has that coverage ability. Now you bring him down in the box because he has such great size and speed. So Toure is more of your traditional safety that they're going to try to develop into a Jaquan Brisker type or an over-the-top. Jair Brown and Brisker could do both. They could play center field. They could come down in the box. They were your all-encompassing safety, and that's what Coach Poindexter and Terry Smith have done so well to this point. Dylan, let's go back to the weekend of June 2nd because – yes, Penn State landed not one, not two, but three commits on one day for Sunday, June 4th. But there were still a lot of guys that left with the impression that they weren't too far behind to commit. The first guy that comes to mind is Jaylen Harvey. He's that edge defender, defensive end, outside linebacker. We don't know yet, but he's listed as an edge defender. Sure. And from what I heard, he's canceled his other official visits. So his commitment date is actually set for the 23rd. Is Penn State, he did this after visiting Happy Valley. So does that mean Harvey is a shoo-in to commit to the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, so Harvey is a little interesting. You mentioned that 23rd commitment date. That does seem to be the commitment date that he has set. He did post on Twitter briefly a couple days ago about that on the 23rd, then quickly deleted it. So we'll see if that does remain. Remain. I'm personally still going off the assumption that is when we're looking at a commitment potentially out of Harvey. Now, will he take official visits? He told he didn't tell us, but we were told by sources familiar with the recruitment that he did cancel his other official visits. However, he then told Rivals national recruiting analyst Adam Friedman that he would be taking other official visits. So the question is, which one is actually going to happen? Yeah. And I don't think we'll know until I think USC was next up on his official visit list. So we'll see if he shows up in Southern California this weekend. If he doesn't, it's a pretty good sign for Penn State. Even if he does, I don't think Penn State really has anything to be worried about here. I think they have this one pretty much locked up. It's, I think, just a formality at this point.
And then I'm glad we brought up defensive line as far as, again, Harvey could end up on the defensive line. We don't know for sure, but he's just a dynamic type of defender that Penn State, again, will benefit with him being in the class of 2024. Mylachi Williams, you brought up. Now that's in the June 9th, but I look at someone like Deyvid Palepale because when we last spoke, you said that he was someone who, if he took the Michigan official visit, he would have been a commit for Penn State. Or he would have been a commit for the Wolverines. Yeah. Where do you think Penn State stands with Palepale?
I think they definitely helped themselves. The question is how much ground did they make up? I still think Michigan is the leader coming into this weekend. And if he commits to Michigan once he makes that visit, I would not be shocked. But I think Penn State may have done enough to delay his decision a little bit here. Okay. I think he also wants to take some official visits elsewhere. He is a kid from Alaska. Washington, USC were two schools that he was really happy to get offers from earlier in the cycle, so potentially tries to take official visits there. If he wants to take those official visits, he obviously is probably going to wait. I do think Michigan's going to push for that commitment on this upcoming official visit here. So I do think they helped, but I still think there's more ground to be made up here. But if you're Penn State, all you can hope for at this point, I think coming in to last week, all you could have hoped for was to do enough to delay a decision. And then you just continue to try and chip away. And perhaps you eventually get to the spot where you can land a commitment.
And then over the course of June 2nd through the 4th, there were plenty of other wide receivers. I know the focus is on Nick Marsh, getting someone who is going to be a difference maker at that position, but I like Jaylan Hornsby a lot as a prospect. Of course, they did bring on some other wide receiver recruits, one of which was actually committed to Miami. That is Chance Robinson. But Hornsby made a significant impression on me. I'll tell you somebody who did make a significant impression on Penn State, who's flying under the radar. Once again, how many times have we said this, Dylan? And that is Peter Gonzalez, who participated in the camp on June 4th. So where is Penn State's focus when it comes to other wide receiver recruits?
Yeah, Peter Gonzalez, I think, has definitely jumped the board after a really strong camp last Sunday. I will say that I think with Gonzalez, it may be and this is an assumption right now. There's no deep intel in here, so don't read into what I'm saying here too much. But I think it may end up being and one or the other type thing with Gonzalez and Hornsby. They're kind of very, very similar prospects. And then you look around, Penn State also has, is trending well for Dre Hawkins. We mentioned Nick Marsh. We'll see what they can do with Chance Robinson. They did a great job with that official visit, but I'm still not sure that they did enough to maybe eventually flip him.
Yeah.
Though I think there is a higher chance he eventually does not end up at Miami. I think where he ends up, that remains to be seen, but that commitment to Miami seems to be a little shaky at this point. But I think you look beyond Nicholas Marsh, you look at a Hornsby, Gonzalez. With Gonzalez coming up on an official visit next weekend, I wouldn't be shocked if he commits on that visit. But Virginia Tech has been recruiting him very hard for a long time, and I think he may feel strongly enough about Virginia Tech to at least give them that opportunity. I had an official visit following that, so we'll see what happens there. But Dre Hawkins is another, and then I think those are the big ones to look at right now.
Yeah. Like to see Penn State take 3 wide receivers if they can. I know Ohio State, the news came out that they're trying to look at 4, getting commitments from 4 wide receivers. If you want to have that same type of presence that Ohio State does, I know they have Brian Hartline. I don't need to get into all of that, but Penn State, the way they are countering that is through cornerback, but it'd be nice to get some more wide receivers too.
I forgot one. New York 3-star wide receiver Josiah Brown is another guy Penn State's really been targeting. And he's coming off a strong official visit to Rutgers. I know our Rutgers sister site knows or felt that the Scarlet Knights had a pretty good chance at him coming out of that official visit. But that's one of those things where I think if Penn State wants him, I just have a hard time seeing Rutgers beating out Penn State for a recruit that Penn State wants. It happens. It happens, of course. Teams do that sometimes, but I just think if that official visit goes well and Penn State really wants Brown to be a part of that class, they'll find a way for Brown to be a part of that class too.
Dylan, I totally get what you're saying. It's just hard to picture little brother Rutgers beating Penn State out for a prospect. That is
exactly.
I'm talking, man. That's like when's the sun explode, Dylan?
I agree. It's one of those things that you would really have, you'd go and rinse your face off with water and make sure that you weren't sleeping still or you're fully awake. Because it would definitely be a little surprising if Rutgers ever did that. We'll see. Rutgers, I think, does have a legitimate chance with Brown, but it's one of those things you give Penn State the benefit of the doubt on that one.
And then in Penn State's case, they might end up flipping over to Georgia. So you never,
anytime a Penn State, anytime prospect commits to Penn State at this point, you have to assume Georgia's going to be offering within 5 minutes afterwards.
Happy Valley Insider is your place to go for all things in the latest in Penn State athletics. Of course, recruiting is the priority right now, but visit happyvalleyinsider.com for everything that Penn State Rivals puts out. Dylan, in this final segment, I think we've covered quite a bit when it comes to the official visits for June 9th and just what's pending because the official visits are great, but none of it matters unless they actually commit. So I think we did a good job there, but now this is pressing because this has been released Thursday, June 8th at the time of the recording of this podcast. The Big Ten has dropped its 2024-2025 schedule, and Penn State, at first there were so every school has a protected rival, at least 3 of them. They have a priority, and then they have second and third. Penn State's protected rivals were Michigan State, which, okay, that's fair. The land-grant trophy is the best of them all. I totally get that. Maryland, Rutgers. Okay. I think that Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, I think they're kind of in a bit of a love triangle when it comes to, I know Ohio State and Michigan, don't get me wrong. I respect the college football rivalries, but Penn State looks at Ohio State more importantly than they do Rutgers. Forget the 1-0 mentality. It's not rocket science here. Same thing with Maryland. Maryland, they did the no handshake, and then it's all been downhill from there. But the Big Ten drops the schedule, and the biggest part of it from Penn State's perspective is they get USC in 2024, aside from who they nominated as, protected as rivals. But that's the big one. First time since 1994, Penn State is going to host USC.
Yeah, that's the one that really pops up out when you look at the schedule. And not only does Penn State host USC in 2024, they travel to USC in 2025 while hosting UCLA in 2025. So Penn State fans are going to get a real close look at the Big Ten's 2 newest programs really quickly in this new conference. And I think on the field that's exciting for anybody, fans, writers. As writers, we want to cover the biggest games, and we get to cover Penn State, which already gives us the opportunity to do so. But the idea of potentially watching Penn State versus USC at Beaver Stadium in Happy Valley, potentially a whiteout, that is insane to think about. It's exciting for, I think, college football fans, Big Ten fans, Penn State fans, USC fans. You can say what you want about expansion, whether or not it's good for college football. And I think both arguments have, a legitimate argument. But it is exciting at the end of the day, the idea of Penn State and USC matching up back-to-back years and going to be, quite common opponents over the next however long this lasts. Of course, and you may, go on to say this, but something that I also noticed here, Penn State's the only Big Ten school not to have a true protected opponent.
Yeah. So that is so I think I'll give credit where it's due, because Sean Fitz is just great in general when it comes to college football coverage and covers Penn State very well. He said, so you could say that Penn State is unrivaled in that case. But if you do have the list, if you do have the list 3, the 3 of them are Michigan State is the most protected, quote, even though it's not a true protection. I'm glad you made that distinction, Dylan. But the 3 that Penn State does have some protection on, Michigan State, Maryland, Rutgers, in that order. That's just number one's not, I would put them at 3rd. I would put Ohio State, Michigan State, but that's a tough schedule because let's look at the 2024 schedule real quick.
Sure.
These are the opponents. These are the home games for Penn State in 2024. Michigan State, that protected rival. Nebraska, Northwestern, Ohio State, USC. That is quite the schedule, but somebody's missing. Michigan is not on this list because the away games, Indiana, Purdue, Rutgers, Wisconsin. And I like that they play 9. The whole point of this conference expansion is to get away from playing the cupcake teams. Delaware, Villanova. You want to play more in-conference games. So forget what the SEC is doing. The Big Ten's doing it right. Eventually, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to 10 at some point in time and you have 2 non-conference opponents, but that's a different debate. And then in 2025, at home, Illinois, Minnesota, Rutgers, UCLA seems pretty fair for Penn State. Away, Iowa, Maryland, Michigan State, USC. That is tough. Out of both groups, Dylan, or out of the 4, I guess, the 24 home away and then 2025 home away. Which grouping of those 4 do you think is the toughest for Penn State right now?
I looking at the 2024 and 2025 schedules, and I may not answer your question directly here. I honestly blanked for a second there, but looking at these schedules, I think the tougher schedule for Penn State right now is probably that 2025 schedule, just because that's a brutal away
on the road. Yeah, no, that grouping itself. Yeah,
Iowa, Michigan State, USC. That is brutal. That's my initial thought on that. And then the 2024 schedule, though, for Penn State, it is quite favorable. Indiana, Purdue, Rutgers, Wisconsin on the road are all winnable games.
Right.
Wisconsin, the toughest of those four. And then home, you get three of your four toughest opponents that year in Ohio State, USC, and then assuming Michigan State could maybe reclaim some of their success here over the next year or two. I like how 2024 pans out for Penn State, which we've been talking about 2023 and 2024 being the key years for Penn State with Drew and what Penn State has on the roster, as these are the years for Penn State to go out, make a run at the college football playoffs, make a run at the national championship. The 2020-24 Big Ten schedule really plays well for Penn State in that aspect too.
Then it's decision time, really. We know that Michigan State's going to be the last game of the season for Penn State in 2024, but Ohio State, USC, depending on where those games are located, if they're at the front end of that Big Ten schedule, let's say they're early or one's in late September, one's in early October, that's going to be a tough choice for Pat Kraft, but I'm excited to see how it all unfolds. But yes, the Big Ten schedule has been released. There is that protected class of opponents for each school. Again, Penn State having the least protection when it comes to their quote unquote rivals because they're unrivaled, but it is out in the open. It's come out into the daylight. Dylan, I'm glad we got the chance to talk about it. All of this, including, of course, your specialty recruiting, but just in general, Penn State football as a whole. Where can people keep up with what you do so that others can follow along to see all of this and more?
Yeah, and before I do that, I just want to quickly mention that with adding USC, UCLA, we've seen Penn State go into California recently, have success. Yeah. And I think adding USC, UCLA is only going to add to that. It gives Penn State the selling point of, hey, come to Penn State. You can still come home and play football in Southern California once or twice in your career. And USC and UCLA are going to come out and play us too in Happy Valley. So that's a big selling point for James Franklin and the team. And it's just going to give them a bigger foothold down in California or out west in California. And in Southern California, I think it's going to be beneficial for them. Their national reach has been really growing the last few years. And if they can start dipping into California routinely, this program has a chance to go to an even higher level, in my opinion. But where people can keep up with me on Twitter @RivalsDylanCC, as well as over at PennState.Rivals.com at Happy Valley Insider.
Dylan, thanks for the time as always. I really appreciate it. Can't wait to do this again soon.
Thanks for having me, Zach.